I'm Park Howell, and welcome to the Business of Story, where I consult, teach, coach, and speak on the applied science and bewitchery of brand and business storytelling, so that you can clarify your story to amplify your impact and simplify your life.
I thought it was just a stupid picture of a pig in the ocean. But after hearing that story, I had to have it. Now I wasn't just buying a picture. I was buying a story. Story literally made the picture worth more money to me.
That's what businesses are about. People buy brands. People buy stories much more than anything else.
I work with a lot of big enterprise companies, but let's just say I always tell folks, drop the PowerPoint, close your laptops, start with your story.
If you want people to get engaged and you want people to act, you have to tell them an emotionally powerful story. That's with great characters, it's with uncertain outcomes, and it's with high stakes and drama.
All business strategy is a story.
I bet you've heard the popular factoid that goldfish now supposedly have longer attention spans than us bipedal hominids. Some research suggests that we see upwards of 5,000 ads per day, so it's no wonder we might be a little bit distracted. Media Kicks calculated average time spent per day on YouTube to be around 40 minutes. Facebook came in around 35 minutes, Snapchat 25, Instagram 15 minutes, and Twitter just 1 minute, which seems a little bit low to me. They also project that the average person will spend like 5 years of our lives on social media. 5 years. But just because we're there doesn't mean that we're paying attention to you, does it? Or to me, for that matter. So, how do you keep your content from skipping off their noggins like a space capsule ricocheting off Earth's atmosphere and into oblivion? Well, what if instead of creating a meteor shower of content, you tried something different, like long-form storytelling? Today, we have a guest who generated millions of dollars in 12 weeks with her very first online campaign, and she had no previous ad writing experience before it. A content marketer who publishes stories online that are 2 to 3 times longer than most, but generates 75% conversion rates for her clients. Kylie Slavik calls herself an accidental digital marketer because she never intended to get into this business, but since she has 5 years ago has been quietly revolutionizing the way online marketing is done. Her innovation in the online advertising industry came from decades as a slam poet. She had learned how to connect with an audience in just 3 minutes to transform their heart, inspire them to see the world through different eyes, or to feel an emotion they weren't experiencing when they walked into the room. But Kylie grew to realize that performance poetry was limited in its reach, and it often felt like she was just preaching to the choir. So after a serious talking to by a Cherokee medicine woman, yep, that's right, a Cherokee medicine woman, Kylie embraced her calling as an entrepreneur and translated her storytelling skill into online marketing campaigns for purpose-driven brands. Kylie has generated over $5 million for her clients in the past 5 years, tapping the power of story and what she calls digital empathy, and avoiding the typical fear, scarcity, tactical approach promoted by much of the advertising world. And guess what? She's here right now to show you how you can do it too. So please welcome Kylie Slavik to the Business of Story. Kylie, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, I've got to start with that question I always start with these days, and that is, Kylie, take us to a moment in your life, and it could be when you were just a little girl, that has informed who you are today as a professional storyteller.
Sure, that's wonderful. There's so many. I'm actually going to select the moment that marked my career, my transition from a performance poet to a story-based advertiser, because that just feels really relevant to me in this moment. And I'll tell you, I was living in rural Arkansas at the time, and there was a natural disaster, so I was not living in my home. I was living in a camper with very, very little internet due to that.
What kind of natural disaster was it?
It was a bit of a tornado.
Ooh. It's either a tornado or not a tornado.
Well, it was power outage and electricity related tornado kind of stuff that can happen in that area, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and it's the deep South, and it was super, super rural. So when, things go down, they don't put them back up like they do in San Diego. It takes a little bit of time. So I was having very little Wi-Fi and living in someone's backyard in this camper, which was awesome to have a place to be. But what happened was I had just started with a new client. Her name was Gina DeVee, and I had been a launch manager for several years and just managing people's JV launches in the internet marketing and coaching space. But I never really was a copywriter or a storyteller, and I wasn't doing any ads. So Gina called me that day, and I'm sitting here in a camper. Now, this woman's running her company from a luxury home in Santa Barbara. So it was a pretty funny scenario there. And she said, Kylie, you've been doing a really good job with the launch. And I'm just wondering if you would like to run the Facebook ad campaign as well. And there's millions of dollars on the line here. And I'm just in that space where I didn't know what I didn't know. So I was crazy enough to say, sure, I'll just run a traffic campaign for your launch. No problem. And I had no idea what I was doing. So that weekend, I bought 5 Facebook ads courses, went through all of them with almost no internet. If you can imagine watching 40 hours of video in 20 hours with a spinning wheel because you have no service. And then I had no idea how to write an ad. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't understand anything about tech, but I just decided that I was up for it. So what I did was I told a story. I told a story about her life. I told a story about who she was as a person. I captured her essence and I ran this ad. And 3 days later, she called me and she said, Kylie, we checked the reporting 3 times. We thought it was wrong. We thought it was a lie. And we had spent something like $575 on this little story that I told, and it had generated 7 high ticket sales. So the return was $67,500. And that was my first ad. And I just attribute that to having been a performance poet, having been a storyteller. But that was the moment that I realized, wait a minute, this applies to business as well.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit. I mean, that's fantastic. So you get into this, and I love the exuberance of youth. It's like, sure, I'll do that. And then you are sitting in someone's backyard in a trailer with almost no internet, and you are taking Facebook advertising classes. I love it. But then you defaulted back to what you knew, and that is how to tell a story. And so did you even, I'm curious, when you went to write that story, did you even think of it actually strategically, or did it just feel like that's what needed to happen? And it wasn't until after you saw the impact, you realized the strategy.
Yeah, that's exactly. You basically nailed like the next 7 years part of the story, because I had no idea. There was no strategy. I just thought about who this woman is as a person, and I shared basically to the best of my ability from her heart. Like, this is what I would say if you were right in the room with me. This is like the intimate message that I have for you. And I remembered an anecdote that she had shared about this Bob Proctor seminar that she went to. And I shared the story and I shared the outcome. And I do have an English degree, but I never studied story structure intensively during that time or as a performance poet. So a lot of it was very intuitive, and people started to ask me after that campaign happened. They started asking me, how do you do it? How do I do it? And that's when I really started to try to understand the form and the structure, because I thought to myself, well, you just do it and it works. And other people want to know the steps and the logic. And so I'm going to become masterful at that next. And that's what I did for the next 7 years. I studied story form and story structure. And now I have a different approach, but I still do think there's a magic and an intuition that, we don't want to discount.
Well, absolutely. And I do believe that we were all at the tops of our storytelling games in kindergarten, and it just gets quieted in us. Yet you were a slam poet. Let's go back for a minute, because I think this is really interesting in that I studied a lot of music and music composition and theory, and understood, how you write music. I never thought about actually applying it to the craft of advertising and marketing and how you tell a story. That ran an agency for 20 years, and we were always quite successful in 15 of those 20 years, because intuitively we were good storytellers, but I was never intentional about it. So sometimes, you would, like, I would imagine some of your poetry really hits, and other times it doesn't hit so well, just because that's nature, and that's the nature of creativity. But I have found, like it sounds like you have, is once you apply a framework like ours with the story cycle and become intentional about telling a story, your whole world changes in communications. And you hit the ball out of the ballpark more times than not, just because you are connecting with people in how the brain likes to take in content, through narrative structure. So it sounds like you experienced that and that you wrote your first story out of intuition. Take us back. How did you get into becoming a slam poet? And take us to a time when you nailed a poem and one fell flat on its face and what you learned from that.
That's great. I love it. How I got into it, I started writing poetry when I was maybe 6, 7, 8, something of that nature. But I obviously had no exposure to the performance poetry spoken word world at that age, and it didn't even in its current form, in the slam form, it wasn't even around during that time. I think it really started to popularize in the late 80s. I may be a little bit off on that, but it really exploded across the country in the 90s and continues to do so today. So I was living in Florida, and I was a recent graduate of the University of Florida, and I had this English degree, and everybody kept telling me to go and get a job. And I did get jobs in restaurants and bars and things like that. I was an artist, and I wanted to be an artist. I didn't want to sit in corporate America and do all of those things that I was supposed to do. And so I really spent those early 20s crafting my art. And I met this woman who had just moved to Gainesville, where I was living, who had been organizing slam poetry stuff in the Tampa Bay area. And just a week before that, a friend of mine had given me a CD, and it was this performance poetry, and I had never heard anything like it. And I was I was like, this is me. This is who I am. I just didn't know about it. And then I meet this girl a week later, and she's telling me, oh, I organized all this poetry in Tampa. Well, I pull the CD out of my purse, and she tells me, this is actually my team. I choreographed and directed that entire album that's in your purse right now. So in that moment, we knew that something was happening and something needed to happen. And we created a performance poetry spoken art venue within 30 days together of knowing each other. And it became a very popular spot for performance poetry in Gainesville. And in a college town where it's all like go Gators and beer, we would get hundreds of people to come see performance poetry on a Friday night. And we were getting national and internationally touring talent to come and feature in this little tiny town. And so that's how that started. And
when was this? Was this in the 90s or 2000s? Or
This started in 2007.
2007. Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up learning how to be a performance poet while also running the events, booking the talent. I was doing all of it. And so I would say we can start with an epic fail. We went to a venue in Jacksonville, and we did these pieces that were super true to our hearts. And we thought, we're going to just rock it. And not one single person in the room, not one person, not one of the people made any kind of gesture, noise, clap, cheered. It was complete silence for both of us when we performed our piece. So that was really shocking for me. Nothing like that had happened.
Do you think, why was that? In hindsight, why do you think that happened?
I think there was a huge cultural difference between our venue that we were running in Gainesville and then what was happening in Jacksonville. And the takeaway was, stay true to your art and also think about your audience. And as a marketer, that's been the number one thing I have to think about all the time is let's stay true to the brand's voice, but who are we speaking to? So we didn't really think about that. And there was no way to think about it. I had never been to that venue before, but it was just a very different type of place than anything I had ever seen before. And they were not receptive to my work, and it was actually very painful.
What a learning experience, though. So you go in there and you are true to your art. You lay this out there, and crickets.
Yeah.
Find out or have this realization that, you're in the same state, right? But you have a completely different culture sitting in that Jacksonville theater than you did in Gainesville.
Mm-hmm. And they just stared at us both, and we were like, okay, this is interesting. I was crushed. I'm not going to lie and say I sat there and said, this is interesting, but that did go through my mind. But I was also pretty emotionally shook up because as an artist, I think artists are already more sensitive than the average person. And then to get on stage, I'm pretty shy. So to get on stage and to share my art and share something that really meant something to me, and I thought people were going to be really into it, and just get that flat response, it was pretty mortifying. And I think it prepared me for the advertising world, because in advertising, we get this immediate response. This, especially not so much with broadcast advertising, but definitely with social media advertising, people either click or they don't. And you know pretty quickly if that ad is going to turn a profit or not. And with performance poetry, that audience feedback loop is even faster. You know, you're on stage and you're looking at everyone and they're just staring at you. And it's almost like, should I just stop in the middle of this poem and go home? Or do I keep going and finish it?
Or just suck it up and get through it, huh?
Which I did do, but on hindsight, maybe just sparing us all would have been better.
So what did you learn then from slam poetry and performance poetry? Now, you be true to your artwork, know your audience, but was there something in there that the storyteller in you knew intuitively back then, but you had the aha moment when you came out into advertising and go, oh, that's why that particular piece works, because of the story structure?
Well, the overarching thing that I learned as a performance poet that I've carried over into advertising is really just how to move a crowd emotionally and to do it really, really fast. Because in that world, if you're participating in a slam, they will cut you off after 3 minutes. Like, you basically lose if you go over 3 minutes. So that sort of soundbite story is what I gained mastery over in that world that I've been able to translate into advertising.
How do you move an audience then? What are some of the little tricks as a poet that you would do on stage just to get them to keep moving along with you?
I think one of the things is the details. So one of the things that in that fail that had happened was, I think I shared more from a philosophical perspective and less from a, hey, here's a character that you guys care about, that you relate to, and I'm going to give you this sequence of events that happens and a couple surprises, and there's going to be a takeaway. And if you see the slam poets that tend to win at the national and international level, you're going to find that there's that similar form and that similar format as we talk about in marketing and they talk about in screenwriting. There's a hero, the audience has empathy for them, they go through trials and challenges, and they land in the end, on their feet or with some new realization or some kind of transformation has occurred. And I find that in the very beginning, I wasn't really doing that. It was more just like emotional spew, this is how I feel and this is what's going on in my mind. So there was a level of lack of relatability. And I learned over time, just performing hundreds and hundreds of times, I have to put this in a format that people can relate to. Okay, let me try to do it this way. Let me try to do it this way. By the end of my career as a performance poet, I could have any room's attention in 3 seconds.
You just knew how to do it.
So now I get it. Yeah.
That's this idea then of going and sharing content or stories, not from a philosophical standpoint, but from a physiological standpoint, meaning an event, a transformation, something that actually happens to a person. And the philosophy then is built within that event. They get to arrive at their own philosophy instead of us being the preachers of philosophy.
Right. And it reminds me of what I was listening to one of those classes on drama writing a month ago. And the director who was teaching the class, he said, the purpose of drama is not to educate. It is not to inform. It is not to share an ideology with the world. If you do that, you're really missing the mark. It's really to entertain. And I thought about that and I was like, I'm not going to take that 100% of the way into my work, but I'm certainly going to take it into consideration in my work.
Well, I'm just writing that down because that's a great quote. And what it makes me think, I had Michael Backus on the show a few weeks ago, and he was talking about storytelling and propaganda. And the propagandists, what they always try to do is share content, share stories to allow your audience to arrive at the conclusion you want them to, so it feels like their idea and not yours. So in that case, you are sharing from a physiological sense. You're talking about transformation to underscore an ideology or to educate them, but allow them to arrive at the educated moment versus trying to just cram it down their throat.
Exactly. And that's another thing you can really see so fast in the paid traffic world, which is where most of my storytelling as an entrepreneur has lived. Because if you have a client and they're spending 10, 20, 30 grand a month on Facebook ads or even more sometimes, you're going to know on day one how the audience is reacting to that. They're either sharing it and it's going viral and people are super excited about this message, or there's nothing. I have almost never seen in between with ads.
So let me ask you, in the paid traffic world, I always think of it as you don't have a lot of space. You got to cut to the chase very, very quickly. How, and maybe that from the slam poetry side of life and working in the soundbite world, give us some examples of how you use story and Facebook ads and others where you are really limited on the amount of content you can have and the time that someone's going to look at that. How do you do it? And give us some examples of what's working for you.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you first, I have a tendency to write really long copy ads that even when I had a Facebook representative working with me one-on-one, she was like, this is very, very long. This is much longer than our platform would want, but your results are amazing. She's like, your results are better than most of the results I've seen. So I guess it's working for you. So I am not opposed to 500 and 800 words in an ad.
Mm-hmm.
However, that's long for a Facebook ad. And again, it's not a novel and it's not a film, right? It's still pretty soundbite-ish. So I wanted to make that distinction. I'll give you a really concrete example of what I did with an ad to turn a campaign around that wasn't really driving home. And it was for a holistic dog food brand. And they were really, really, really passionate about what they did. And they were so informed about the health problems with the traditional dog food industry and the benefits of theirs. And in marketing, we're taught talk about features and benefits. So that's what they were doing. And they were a client of an agency that I was writing ads for. So the agency brought me on board mostly to extract stories from all their clients and to convey that across an advertising message. And so what I did was I saw the ads and I was like, okay, let's really think about the average dog owner. They probably have a family. They're working. They potentially have kids. They're really busy and they're probably not even having enough time to worry about what's on their plate. So are they really thinking about what's on the dog? Like they think their vet told them this is the healthiest food, so they're cool with that. They are not thinking about it any further. So you're speaking into a place where there's not enough pain or not enough awareness for someone to take action. And I said, this is dogs. This is the pet niche. The pet niche is one of the only niches that actually survives and thrives in economic crash. So I was like, there's no reason this isn't working. And what I did was I jumped on the phone with the woman who ran the company and I said, listen, I want to know why you started this company. And I just want to, I want to know you. So she tells me this story about how her dog died. Her Great Dane died when he was 4 and he died of cancer and she freaked out because he was super young and she was a farm woman and never had seen this before and couldn't understand it. She went on a mission to figure out why it happened. And there was obviously lots of twists and turns in that. And the end result was that she created a dog food company that was in accordance with the nature intended diet. And what I did was I said, okay, people can believe that dogs share 99% DNA with wolves. So we'll lead with that. And we'll talk about how, we'll actually lead with a story, but that will be the validation of the story. And what I did was, to answer the other part of your question, I created a 10 to 12 slide text over video ad where in a very short amount of time, probably 45 seconds, we told the story of her losing her dog and how emotional that was for her and how she went on this mission and how she discovered the reason why. And then instead of saying, the traditional dog food world is bad, which Facebook wouldn't like, and there's a whole lot of compliance issues with that, I introduced this concept that dogs share 99.8% DNA with their ancestors, wolves. Wolves eat raw. And so eating pellets is not the best thing for your dog. And here, let's do this instead. And that video had millions of views, but it had I don't want to say hundreds of thousands of shares, but it was well over 10,000 shares. So dog lovers were now seeing this and getting emotionally hooked into the story. Not only did it overcome the problem of like, I'm busy, I don't have time to think about this. They were like, I want my friends to know about this. So that's one way that I did an ad that is story-based that really, really worked.
Well, and it goes back to the origin story. One of the most powerful stories you could possibly have for a brand, and yet so many ignore them or don't think about it. But that's what you did, is you went in and asked her, why did you start this? And no one can argue with that why. And then when you can proof it out through some data and stats, the 99.8% DNA of wolves is your dog, and they were like, then it brings it full circle. But you're leading with emotion and then backing that emotion up with stats and facts.
Exactly.
Is that video still up online?
I have tried to find it. The thing about ads is they don't show up on your business fan page if you go to it. So I've actually tried to find it and I can't. I probably could contact her. I'm not working with that agency anymore, but I probably could ask her for it. However, every time I try to find it, I can't find it. I've seen it on Instagram before and taken screenshots of all the slides. So I have all the screenshots of all the slides, but I can't find the link to play the video.
Well, if you could get the raw file, Kylie, I would love to include it in your show notes here so that people can not only hear what you did, but then they can see it in action. So I'm going to give you a homework assignment, as I often do with Business's Story, just track down the file of that and we can get that posted. I'd love to do that.
Yes, and if I can't, at the very least, I can provide the slides and what they look like. So that's definitely one possibility.
So let's move over to like your work in helping drive traffic for webinars and other, maybe paid per click content, that kind of thing. So often it's like, okay, webinar, give me your title, give me a quick description, give me the 3 bullet points people are going to leave with, and then tell them, the seating is limited and, sign up now. That seems to be the format everybody. Does that format work, or how have you hacked it to get the kinds of results you have apparently for your clients per your testimonials on your website?
Well, so yes, that format does work. And the understanding that I have about that format is industry standard. People are pretty happy with a 10 to 20% conversion rate on those pages. And when I do longer copy story-based landing pages for webinars, for video series, for whatever it is that my clients are sharing with people, their free content, those landing pages may have 300 to 500 words on them, which is very sacrilegious in my industry. But they were, a couple of years ago, they were converting between 50 all the way up to 77% to cold traffic. So that's pretty much 3 times the industry standard. That's one way to look at it. And, Facebook has gotten a lot harder to get attention on in the last couple of years. So I can't say that those numbers would ring true still today. But what I do know is they tend to outperform the more bullet driven, more here's the features, here's the benefits. Although there is a time and a place. Sometimes your product or your service or what you're giving away for free has just such a clear, tangible benefit. You could write one sentence about that benefit and everybody would want it. But it has to be a pretty unique product that people haven't seen before. And most people don't have that. I have been mostly in the coaching and transformation space where I tell my clients, look, people's lives can be so improved by you and what you're doing, but they don't need it, right? You're not selling food. You're not selling water. You're not selling a house.
You're higher up on the Maslow hierarchy of needs.
Yeah, people don't really need your services. They don't need mine. We do have clear, tangible benefits, and people will be just fine without us at the end of the day. So you have to lead with a story in that case, because you have to cut through the noise and you have to create an immediate emotional connection, or you're just going to get buried in the newsfeed. And so my landing page style is really to open with this personal letter, like, hey, visionary, or hey, whoever you are, transformational agent or woman on a mission, whatever it is. And then to share a little bit about that person's journey and their struggle and their breakthroughs around what it is that they're now giving away for free. So again, like elements of origin story, elements of discovery, elements of a little bit of pain and struggle and triumphing over that, because people, you know this from being a story expert, people don't like it if you just come out and brag and you're like, I have this amazing thing and you need it and you can't live without it, because that just shuts our brains down. So that's been my style for landing pages, and it's been a signature style for me, and it's done very, very well.
Well, it's a signature style because essentially you are writing the signature story for your client, their origin stories. Why do you do what you do? What is it? And that's why I like to start the show with, take us to a moment that says, who you are, informs who you are today. Because I think so often we're looking at this big grand story or looking for this epic journey, and we don't take the time to stop and look at the scenes. Find the scenes, those moments that have all the impact, like your client's Great Dane who died at 4 years old. That moment when she's sitting there going, why? There's nothing wrong with this dog. What happened? Well, that moment triggered everything, totally changed her life.
Right.
Now, a lot of people that happens to, they feel bad, they cry, they bury their dog, and off they go on to something else. But she is literally out changing the world of pet owners and dog owners because of that. And how many brands, you think about it, the larger the brand, the less you get that. The less you see it. Now, one of the best origin stories I've read in a long time, and I've mentioned it several times on the show, is Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. Not a book I would have gotten myself. I was given it following a keynote that I provided, and the client said, here, I think you might like this. And it's some of the most brilliant business storytelling, but it's one long origin story about the struggle that Bowerman and Phil Knight went through. And he said in that book, one of the things that I hear in what you're talking about is he said, people buy belief. He said the reason why they were successful selling their shoes out of the trunks of their cars is they knew these shoes were better, and they believed, even if they went in to sell them and somebody, looked down on them or just like, oh, well, what kind of stuff are you trying to sell me here? They bought his belief. Well, man, you are really into this thing. I see your passion. I'll buy your belief. And then, of course, the product has to sell, once you do that. But that's what you're really talking about here, is finding that origin story that highlights the belief of the brand, the person that founded that brand, and then back it up on their success. And here's why it works.
Absolutely. And yeah, that was a very compelling story. I listened to the audio when I drove from New York to San Diego a couple of years ago when I moved out here. I think it was like 15 CDs long. It lasted a few days. It was really good. And I think if we're looking at what you're reflecting, I don't know too many brands that have done that better than Nike and Apple. I use them as examples all the time.
Do.
They just make it so easy.
Well, let me go a little bit more back into your origin story, because I was reading through your bio and I was captivated by your fourth paragraph. You realized that performance poetry was limited in its reach, and often you felt like you were just preaching to the choir. So those sitting in the audience were, performance poets themselves, and just so you weren't having the impact, but you did have a serious talk with a Cherokee medicine woman. Take us to that talk.
Did I tell you that? I wrote, that's funny. This is powerful. I was in the art world and I was in the healing world. I was a massage therapist with an English degree and a performance poet, and working in restaurants here and there to supplement my income. And that was my life. And I was really happy with that. And I have this whole other story about getting hit by a car and ending up in New Zealand because of that car wreck, because a woman who ended up being the head of the North and South American Sufi healing order saw me in a parking lot with my injuries and did some healing work with me, and then took me to this sort of red carpet spiritual tour to New Zealand. And that is where I met this woman. Her name's Franchelle, and she's a huge part of my origin story. I met her. I had such a judgment about her. I was like, what is this woman doing at a spiritual conference? Like, look at her. She just seems kind of, I had all my little judgments about her. And then she gave a talk. And I was in tears. I was so moved by what she shared about healing and her life. And just, it was that sort of moment of, wow, do not judge somebody when you see them, and the power of the connection of story. Because when she shared her story, I'm still a client of hers 15 years later. Well, a couple of years into my relationship with her, I could only afford at that time, I think it's like $200 an hour to talk to her. And at that time, I could only afford to talk to her once a year. And I would wait all year and give it to myself for my birthday every year to talk to her. And one year she said, Kylie, here's the thing about you. You have to become an entrepreneur in this life. You have to become wealthy. You have to stop trading dollars for hours, and you have to have really big global influence, or you're holding your soul back a grade in school. That's what she said to me. And I remember sitting there thinking, I want my $200 back. Like, I love you more than anyone on this planet. And I have so much respect for you. And I've done everything you've told me to do up to this point. And I'm not going into business. Like, I'm a healer, I'm an artist, like I had this whole sort of, I don't like the corporate world. And
So that was a story you were telling yourself. I'm a lefty,
Oh, yeah,
liberal artist, and I'm not about the money. I'm not about helping in the corporate way.
I was like, these companies are destroying the planet and ruining everything. And it was just like this, like younger, angry story that I had. And the next day I went to the bookstore and this book kept getting my attention. And so I picked it up and it said Online Success Secrets of the Internet Marketing Superstars.
Oh, wait a minute. Say that title one more time.
Yeah. Online Secrets of the Internet Marketing Superstars, or something like that. It's by Mitch Meyerson, and it's a bunch of interviews with who were at that time the gurus. I think probably Frank Kern is in that book.
Yeah. Well, the irony is here you are a slam poet artist, and yet you are hooked by one of the most commercial titles I think I've ever heard of.
Oh, it's ridiculous, right? And I know. And so I read the book in 2 hours, and the light switch that went off in my head in that moment was, wait a minute. I can actually take this message that I'm trying to share with a bunch of other broke, struggling artists and reach anyone in the world that I want to. And I remember when I was working with Gina and we had that first successful weekend. Well, by the end of that launch, we had generated $2.5 million in 12 weeks. Now we were selling a $10,000 program, cold traffic, no sales calls, or very few. We ended up selling to people in 30 countries. And this was and I was running all of the ads. I was shocked. And I'm looking at people from Dubai, people from Panama. I mean, people from places I'd never even dreamed of going. And they're responding to the message that I'm writing in my pajamas in rural Arkansas. And something like that was a huge aha moment for me, because I realized, wait a minute, I can have a global impact for a few $1,000s and a couple of hours of my time. And it was so eye-opening that I found a way to make digital marketing my spiritual practice, which is kind of a funny thing, but that's how it's turned out.
And that example right there, where you just said that I could be impacting people in Dubai from my pajamas, underscores something that I always say, and now I have the perfect little anecdote to share with people, is that I believe that storytelling is the one true superpower we possess as human beings. We can't fly. We can't break through concrete walls. We can't, run this, at the speed of light. But we can change behaviors with complete and utter strangers that maybe don't even speak our same language. Clear around the world and get them to do something through the power of story.
Absolutely. And I had never seen it play out on such a global level in my own life. I held that belief, but when it unfolded right in front of my eyes and I looked at the amount of money we spent, the amount of money that came in, and then as we delivered the program over the next year, and I came and I taught in the program and I got to know the people. I mean, one of the women the woman from Panama, she was 21. She had never heard of coaching industry before. We were selling a coaching certification program. She didn't even know what coaching was. Her entire family was not supportive of her decision. And 6 months later, after joining this program, she's running a full-time coaching business living in London. So it was just like the transformation that I was seeing unfold right in front of my eyes. I thought to myself, okay, I'm onto something. And I did this as basically an amateur, as a poet, as an artist. I was able to do this. But now I want to dedicate my life really to understanding why that happens so that I can do it at even bigger and bigger levels. And so I ended up hiring some of the Hollywood story consultants, like, okay, shred my work and make me cry. And they did. And I wanted to understand it on a deeper level, but I had never had that much impact in other people's lives before. And it really, really moved me and it changed my life.
A lot of times people will say, and I hear this, it's hard. I don't have time to try to figure out story structure, or it's a gimmick or whatever. And you went so far as to hire some Hollywood screenwriting, story consultants to come in and parse through your work and help you clarify that. I've done the same thing. I spent the money and went to Robert McKee's 4-day story course with my son, the filmmaker, and he went to make films. I went to try to understand what does Hollywood teach us so that we could be better at our line of work. So how do you simplify it for people or get them to the point that they will come along with you in the story crafting world and not be intimidated by the forms or frameworks or what they might call formulas that they think that they have to learn?
There's two pieces to my answer to this. The first thing is, I want to reframe that for people and let them know how much harder it's going to be to succeed with digital marketing if you don't tell a story. And how much money I've seen people waste 6 figures on trying to develop funnels that have no story and then end up just feeling totally despondent and deflated and giving up on their dreams because they've mortgaged their house or they've taken out a bank loan and they were promised by some advertising company that this lead generation machine would work, but there was no story, there was no resonance, and there was no emotion, and it didn't work because nobody knew who they were. And if nobody knows who you are, if you're not Eckhart Tolle, you have to tell stories.
90% of people listening to this aren't going to know who Eckhart Tolle is. If you're not Steve Jobs.
Okay,
there
so
you go.
if you're not Steve Jobs,
oh yeah,
and he was a storyteller even, right? So a masterful one at that. So that's the first piece. Is it's easy. It's a lot harder in digital marketing if you don't tell stories. And the second piece is, yes, we can simplify it the simplest way. And I did this with a nonprofit in Austin, Texas, who was trying to raise money around the topic of human trafficking, which, as you can imagine, nobody wants to talk about and everybody looks away. They run the other way when they see them coming. So the simplest way, now we could use the hero's journey. We could use the conflict, show a hero, establish empathy, show the conflict, show the stakes, show the aftermath. That's another structure. But the simplest structure is what I did with them. And I said to them, listen, you guys, we got to get you more money. And here's the thing. Tell me your story in 60 seconds. Well, they started to tell me about all the policy in Texas and all the laws and all the things. And I was like, your donors don't care about that. And let's look at your donor base. You're in Austin. Okay, so that means there's a ton of tech startups. There's a ton of entrepreneurs. What do entrepreneurs care about? They care about freedom. What are your people, what is being stripped away from your people? Freedom. So the simplest way to tell a story is to find a values match between your brand and your audience and start talking about it. It doesn't have to be this 16-point checklist of the right story structure. And so what they did was they started telling stories about the people that had lost their freedom and what was happening with those people in their healing journey as they were engaging with this nonprofit or things of that nature. Not only did their ads start to get shared, well, first of all, they started to get watched, which was amazing. Then they started to get shared. And then after that, they got a grant and they got on stage and they told a story and they wrote to me and they're like, we would have done facts and figures, but this year we just said, how can we channel our inner Kylie? We got up there, we had a few minutes, we told the story, we won. So finding a way to connect your brand values with your audience values and build little anecdotes, like you nailed it when you said, what's that one moment that reveals this value? That is enough, usually, to get attention and to create resonance.
So it goes back to your Jacksonville experience, doesn't it? You got up on stage and the value in what you were delivering or what was coming through and what you delivered was not matching the value of that audience, and hence cricket. So the same thing happens online too if you're not matching up with values. So it all goes back to understanding your audience. What do they value? What is their story? What journey are they on? And then how can you authentically and honestly connect your story to their story? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I have 7 different structures that I will kind of work with depending on where someone is at. And then there's also, like we talked about in the beginning, there's an intuition. Sometimes the structure is all out of order because it just feels right to tell it this way. And when you mentioned the word formula, and one of the things Robert McKee said when I was at a seminar, I don't know if he said this when you were there, he said there is no formula, but there is a form. Yeah. And so becoming masterful at the form is really powerful. I often share this. If you see a master painter make splatter art, it's pretty cool. and it goes in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, but they can also draw a figure and they can also draw an apple really, really well. And then we'll see like this splatter paint and you're like, this doesn't move me at all. I'm not moved by that. And that artist didn't take the time to master the form. And so I take the time to do it. And when I work with people, I can usually pull the raw materials from what they share with me and kind of give it back to them. Like, okay, this is what I think will work. So, that takes away a little bit of the intimidation too, because part of what I do is help people find it so they don't have to freak out. And one of the things I'm developing is resources for copywriters so they can take that to their copywriters and their teams and translate it over ads and emails and video scripts and all that kind of stuff. So it's a tall order, but that's kind of what I do.
Well, it all does get back to what is the human impact that you're defining or describing or sharing an example of through the anecdote or small story that you're telling. And I'm like you too. I've got a few different structures depending on how big or small we need to go. Like I love Dr. Randy Olson's The and But and Therefore structure, which I have incorporated now into my workshops. And people love it. They go, it's so simple, it can't be that powerful. And yet its power comes from its simplicity. And it's the easiest way to tell a story in 2 sentences or less. Then, of course, I work with the work I do on storytelling for leaders. And this is more about oral storytelling. And when you start thinking about stories to tell is start with a timestamp. That's when I say, take me back when I was 12, when I was 6, when I was 27. This happened, or last week, or, earlier today. Those kinds of timestamps let the audience know that, hey, he's telling me a story. A location stamp. Well, this either happened in Gainesville or Jacksonville, or I found myself, in New Zealand. So our brains love those kinds of specifics, and you don't have to, drone on and on and on. You just, dropping in these little specific hooks to get people in, to get our brain saying, oh, he's telling me a story. And there's character, there's action, and then the aha moment or the surprise. So your surprise in Jacksonville, was that, man, we were true to our art, but nobody liked it. Oh my God, we didn't understand that audience, but now we do. So there's a business point associated with it. So that's another way of looking at it. And then, of course, I use my 10-step story cycle system, which is totally based off the hero's journey, but it's mapped to business. And I do probably what you do with your clients too, is I say, look at when you're first starting out, craft your communications, your strategy in this order from, step 1 through step 10, and it's foolproof. As you get more comfortable with it, as you just get better at telling stories, start mixing it up. You can flip it on its head and tell it exactly backwards, or you can start with the moral of your story, introduce your mentor or guide, and then bring in what's at stake and, have a lot of fun with it. But it becomes content buckets really more than an apps, a story formula. It's just simply a framework that it sounds like you have found it. When you get really good at it, you can start switching things around and make it even more interesting and making it even more your own true art and how you tell that story.
Yeah, I really resonate with that. Very well said.
So what are you up to these days? I mean, are you still doing a lot of the same kind of work, or can you take us to a project that you had a lot of success with? And even have you had a story project that hasn't worked out like you intended?
That's a great question. I know this is going to sound awfully this is not going to sound how I want it to, but I tell my clients story is the one mechanism or method in marketing that gets results 100% of the time. And that's really been my experience. So I would love to share a big, huge failure in the digital marketing world. I've never seen somebody implement story or me implement story and not get results now. That doesn't mean everything is a multi-million-dollar campaign, but I've seen everything from just more engagement on social media posts to just a little bit better of an open rate to just a few more people on showing up for the webinars. And those little metrics make a huge difference for business. So I've never seen anyone try to implement this stuff and it falls flat. And the other part of your question, what am I up to? I am basically story consulting and helping people uncover what the overarching brand story is. But my zone of genius, or where I really, really focus, is how does this translate digitally? So where are we going to put this in your ads? Where are we going to put this in your emails? For some brands, I actually execute on the copy, but really usually only for 1 or 2 brands at a time. So I'm usually maxed out on that. And right now I'm developing some digital programs so that people can take the work that I've been doing and do it themselves. And so that I just wrapped up a launch last week where I sold a digital program on finding your core story. And then there was a series of upsells and that went really well. And that's just, I'm just living and breathing and eating this stuff pretty much.
Now, I know the feeling. It's fun, isn't it? Because the more you dig into it, the more surprising it is on a lot of levels. So why don't we close today's session? If you could give our listeners, and they're ready to turn this off, sit down and write their origin story, what are 2 or 3 things you would recommend that they look for in that story and make sure that they capture to tell the world?
There's 3 things that I think are really important. The first is really the why. So the origin story, it does overlap with the why story. Why did you do this? Why did you make this discovery? How did you make this discovery? Why are you getting up every morning and dedicating a good amount of your life to this thing? I find people really care about that, and it's very important. The second thing is what sort of qualifies you? Why are you really good at what you're doing? What are some of the in my industry, it's life experience, and other ones, it may be certifications, qualifications that make you trustworthy and qualified. And then the third is really what is something that's a little bit human, more vulnerable about you so that we can relate. And I feel like if you can really get those 3 components, you can tell a great story.
I love it. And it doesn't have to be in that order either, I don't imagine. Tell it like you know, but just make sure that those are in there. And if someone is listening to this out there and they want to rewrite their about page just to test this out, how many words would you recommend them going for?
Gosh, depending on your brand, I just wrote an about page that was 6 pages long and it needed to be. My personal about page is 200 words. So I think depending on who you are and what you're trying to convey and who your audience is, it really could be a wide range like that. Typically 1 to 2 pages. So maybe 500, 700 words. That's probably the standard that I see. But again, the story can follow the goal.
Yeah. So yours is actually short then. So someone you've talked about writing lots of long copy and kind of going against the grain with that. You now have an about page that's quite a bit shorter if the traditional one is set 500 to 700 words. But I guess it really just comes down to what do you have to say? I am so haunted sometimes by digital marketing specialists that just hammer, brief, keep it short, bullet points. And it just kind of goes against my storytelling grain that I even sort of cringed when I asked you how many words, because it just really depends on what you're trying to say and what your story needs to breathe and to be impactful and to share the specifics about you to get someone to take that next step.
That's exactly it. Is it emotional and will somebody take action? And I don't care if it's 50 words or 5,000, but is it emotional and will someone take action? That's really the question, probably. Yeah.
Kylie, I think you've got a gift for our listeners. Where can we send them to download your Story Alchemy worksheet?
Yeah. So they can go to kylieslavik.com/story alchemy, no dashes or spaces. And that'll just walk them through a process that I kind of reverse engineered about why that first ad I wrote was so effective. And you can either use that in an ad. And if you're not an ad copywriter or you don't run ads, then you could just use it for a social media post. And I think that it's very effective for just getting that skill down.
And folks, that's Kylie Slavik, KYLIESLAVIK.com/story alchemy.
Yes, it is.
Well, Kylie, thank you so much for being on The Business of Story. Really great to have you. When you had reached out a few months ago, and thank you for your patience too. I've had kind of a backlog of story artists, which has been fabulous. Just the idea about what you're doing in the digital realm with storytelling was really interesting because I just don't see a lot of people doing that. And after visiting your website and now having a chance to speak with you, I'm really impressed and really glad that you found the time to come on our show with us.
Well, thank you so much. It's such an honor. And I can't wait to share this with my audience as well.
Awesome. Thank you all for listening. If you like Kylie's episode, share it with at least one other person, someone that you know that could really benefit from this wonderful insight on how to create stories and her, 3 elements to origin storytelling. Really, really fascinating. And of course, if I can be of service to you at all, visit me over at businessofstory.com. As you know by now, my origin story was all about starting and working in brand marketing and advertising, running my own ad agency until 2006, when I realized it just wasn't working anymore for our clients and especially wasn't working for me. So like Kylie, I went out and studied and became a storytelling practitioner. And so now I have the distinct pleasure, and I love getting up every morning, sharing the applied science and bewitchery of story. So visit me at businessofstory.com. We've got tools, we've got blogs, we've got everything you need to ignite that inner story artist in you, just like Kylie. And until next week, when we will have another marvelous story artist here at Business of Story, I want you to remember that the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks for listening.